Hello, friends. Welcome to another episode of the Rotoworld Football Podcast. I'm Josh Norris here with John Daigle. Mr. Daigle, before this episode started recording, we got onto the conversation that you are not done unpacking yet. What does the Daigle sanctuary look like at home so far?
So right now, since as we know, in season, we have very little free time, all of us that create content. So right now, actually, all that's set up is a weight bench with the...
Was that the priority, was the weight bench?
To be honest, yes,
That's
it really
amazing.
was. Weight bench with the Bowflex, you stick them in and then turn the notches and bring them out, and they can be a certain weight. Makes it very simple, efficient. And then a rug, I have a modern rug with nothing on it just yet because nothing's built. And then you go upstairs, and it's a bed frame with drawers now built as of last
Do you have a
night.
loft?
I do have a little loft, yeah.
Wow.
It's not that fancy.
Look
but
how fancy you are.
Not that fancy. It was just available when I moved here. And then after the drawers, or underneath the drawers, there are tons of screws because there's been no time to sweep just yet. So everything is chaos.
I'm
right
a little
now.
concerned. Like during my time here of 6 years at NBC Sports, they've made me do some ridiculous things. Like I did the Combine, I've gone to the CrossFit Games, I've done the Lumberjack World Championships. I'm wondering if they brought you in, Daigle, since you actually own a bench press and weights at home, that maybe you're just my replacement for all these things and I'm just being replaced overall.
I have
Is that
always
possible?
wanted to do the Combine like you did. Like
Yeah.
I want to go.
Do you think you could beat my stuff?
That's the point. I don't want to go and have everything compared to NFL.
Yeah.
I would just want to beat you. I'm literally just going to compete
Not
with
too
you.
difficult.
That's all I
Tom
wanna
Brady
do.
beat me. Okay, today's podcast, once again, is a loaded one. Yesterday, if you missed it, we went with Ian Hartitz through his injury dashboard. We talked to Nick Minzu about start-sits. Today, we're covering I'll do some alliteration here. The sizzling 6-game previews. 3 with you and I. We're going to add Hayden Winks.
Did you just coin that?
I did.
I like
Fantasy forecast for another 3 games with him. He'll be joining by phone. And then later on, RotoPat, Patrick Doherty, will be joining us to hit on a few notable names in his rankings. Again, subscribe to the podcast. If you're new, you can also check it out on NBC Sports' YouTube page. Tell one friend. That's what we always say. Tell one friend. All right, let's start with probably the best game of the slate, best game of the weekend. It's the Baltimore Ravens at the Kansas City Chiefs, 55 total. Chiefs favored by 6.5. Both teams are 2-0, Daigle. This is one where when you picture in your head, you can kind of see it going in either direction. How do you think it's going to play out?
Neither offense will be stopped in this matchup. We know the Cardinals will continue leaning on 10 personnel, and now the Ravens, who, as we talked about last week, lost a lot of defensive help in free agency, no longer have Jimmy Smith this week as well. He's still out this week, correct?
Yes, I believe.
Yes, I believe he's still out this week. So now, how do they defend the Chiefs? The Ravens defense has quietly allowed the third most explosive plays through the air. And as we know, this is what the Chiefs do. As we saw last week, this is what the Chiefs do, whether Tyreek Hill is involved or not. I genuinely don't see either side stopping the other. That's the reason why this game opened at 51.5 and was quickly bet up and laughed at all the way to 55. Because we know both offenses will flourish, and it goes from the top of the tree to the bottom. Like, who do you stop? Even if Damian Williams and LaShawn McCoy are injured, you don't stop anyone.
The Chiefs are who we thought they were,
Yes.
right? And even last week, they only scored points in one quarter against the Oakland Raiders, but they scored 28 points in a quarter.
They did score 28
and could have had even more with, a 72-yard touchdown called back as well. The Ravens, I think this is their ideal form. This is their final form, some might say. We are really hoping for the Ravens to continue this path. I mean, Lamar Jackson already has more passing touchdowns than he had all of last season. And while Marquise Brown, the rookie, and I've waxed poetic about him all season so far, he's only played on 42% of the team snaps so far this season, yet he's top 6 in the NFL in terms of target share. He's been absolutely fantastic. And I only think that his game is going to expand and grow, especially in a game that could be close like this one with the Chiefs, or working from behind a negative game script, which you really haven't seen the Ravens have this season.
Yeah, and in neutral game script, in one-score situations, which we like to refer to because we can't predict results, but we can predict intent. And so being within one score of the opponent allows us to predict the actual intent of the offense. And the Ravens are still top 3 run rate when it's one-score situations. And yes, that That includes Lamar Jackson, but as we know, Lamar Jackson hasn't even had to run that much so far. Those 3 carries from week 1 brings that rate down even. So I think it's a sneaky matchup for Mark Ingram to get involved, especially because I would assume they want to keep the ball away from Patrick Mahomes. I would assume that's the way they want to play.
So we know the Chiefs are among the highest in terms of rate of plays and number of plays.
Yes.
The Ravens, you think, want to be the opposite and kind of not establish the run because they can do that no matter what, but do play keep away a little bit?
Yes. And playing keep away entails the Chiefs stop them on the ground, and I don't think they can stop them on the ground either.
Yeah. There are some notable injuries here. Eric Fisher, the left tackle for the Chiefs, will be out with a groin injury. LaShawn McCoy is probable. Damian Williams is questionable. And yes, Jimmy Smith is still out week to week with a knee injury. Final question on this. Can the Chiefs continue this offensive success even without running the football?
Yes.
Because they haven't run the football at all so far this season.
So my question to you then is, what is the answer to stop Mahomes? Because in his last, 18 starts, I guess, as a starter, let's exclude the postseason for his regular season starts. But now we talk about the one time he could have been stopped, which was last year on the road against the Patriots, in what was like the tundra, the Snow Bowl, and the Patriots even couldn't stop him. Like, it came down to them getting the ball in overtime and running it down the Chiefs' throats. How do you stop their offense? I don't know.
Yeah, and it was similar to the Rams game last year too, where that you have to match him in points, hope your defense makes one play that either prevents them from converting on 4th down or taking a turnover away, which might be easier with his left tackle being sidelined in this game, and then having the final ball in the final possession and scoring in that environment.
Andy Reid is inefficiently calling one of the highest rates of run plays on second and 10 plus, which then sets your offense up to be miserable on 3rd down because you now have 3rd and 10, 3rd and 14. It doesn't matter because, as we saw, Patrick Mahomes, 3rd and 14, 3rd and 20, he just makes a play. It got called back, Mecole Hardman, that 72-yarder, but it genuinely does not matter their length of 3rd down.
I go back, as you know, and rank these rookies each and every week, and both of Mecole Hardman's big plays, the one that was called back, and I believe he also had a 42-yard touchdown, were on 3rd and 14 and 3rd and 20. So whereas other people will throw screens or short of the sticks, he is looking deep and deep posts and trying to find Mecole Hardman down the field in those situations.
It's also why it was hard to rank the Chiefs receivers this week because they're one and the same. Like Sammy Watkins' target share you can depend on, but both Demarcus Robinson and Hardman, they could both have floor games, but what is their floor games? Like 40 yards? Because that floor includes a wide receiver 1 week just waiting to happen.
And I'm not advocating to start Darwin Thompson, obviously, this week, but would it surprise you at all if we pull in the office on Monday and Darwin Thompson has 85 yards and a nice big play in this performance?
And that includes whether LaShawn McCoy or Damian Williams are active, if maybe they're just hobbled and they get Darwin Thompson involved anyhow.
As a spark.
Yeah. I mean, everyone is going to perform in this game. Everyone.
And I actually think we see more rotation in the Ravens backfield. Like, I don't know if we'll see Mark Ingram get 25 carries because we've seen Justice Hill get carries in the first drive. We've seen Gus Edwards work in there as well. All right, next game is the 0-2 Steelers visiting the 2-0 49ers. The 49ers are 6.5-point favorites at home, 43.5 total in this one. We talked so much about the Steelers earlier in the week with Mason Rudolph now as a starter. So and we haven't spent any time on the 49ers. Let's spend a little time on the 49ers now because I went back and watched their performance last week against the Cincinnati Bengals and was floored. Was so impressed with how totally aggressive and attractive this team was, to be perfectly honest. Like, what Kyle Shanahan is doing as a play caller right now, and the 2 touchdowns he schemed for Jimmy Garoppolo were just that. They were schemed wide open and allowed the skill position players to make the most of it. Plus, they have an aggressive front 7, a defensive backfield that is flying around, and the combination of Raheem Mostert and Matt Breida might be a top 5 running back combination in the league right now.
It's why we discussed getting ahead of the pack and picking up Mostert just last week. And now all of a sudden, Mostert and Breida both rank top 7 in yards after contact per attempt. They are both amazing. They both shed tackles. They can both be involved and be RB2 flexes each and every week in this offense. The scary part is this offense is also doing it without the production we expect from George Kittle so far, who has been an integral part, but like it hasn't shown in the box score, and that's coming. It's coming as early as this week, most likely.
Not to use one of your terms, but this 49ers team is frisky, especially if they go in and win at home against the Steelers, starting 3-0, building the momentum they've had without even allowing or needing a big play out of their quarterback. Like, I think it might come down every single game in tight games to 3 to 5 throws that Jimmy Garoppolo has to make, at least so far how Kyle Shanahan has started the season. I still don't know if Jimmy Garoppolo can do that because he hasn't been forced to make them in the first 2 weeks. But again, growing into the job a little bit as we go along. And finally, I'm not saying this from a fantasy ranking standpoint, but from a runner on the field, Matt Breida might be a top 10 runner in the NFL right now.
He looks amazing. The question mark I have for this game is Joe Staley, starting left tackle, now out. Yeah. We bring in 6th-round rookie Justin Skule, I believe. And do you have any scouting on Skule as well? Yeah, okay. So what does that mean? If there's a coach that could actually coach around that, it's Shanahan, but we haven't seen it just yet. So we have to watch and monitor.
Okay, but let's hit on a little bit on this Steelers team because we know that Juju has started slow. Yes. We know that a second wide receiver who all of us tried to have exposure to in a lot of different drafts has not emerged. Maybe it does now with James Washington. Deontay Johnson is hobbled heading into this game, but long-term might be the play since he was their highest drafted rookie receiver. Vance McDonald had 2 touchdowns last week. Really, what are we expecting from Mason Rudolph and then the trickle down for the other skill position players in this debut for him as a starter?
I can only work under the assumption that the Steelers are working under, and that is all systems go, considering they just traded their 1st-round pick this upcoming year at 0-2 with their backup quarterback under center the rest of the way. That has to mean something. It has to mean they have complete and utter confidence within Mason Rudolph to be as efficient and just to continue the flow of their offense. It was very, very small sample, but he did target Juju on a team-high 5 targets when he came in. Vance McDonald obviously hauled in the 2 touchdowns in the second half. But again, what does this mean? I think it's a great game for Rudolph's first start because the Niners defense continues to be overrated. Are they playing great? Yes. But again, context, they have played Jameis Winston and Andy Dalton. They've played 2 inefficient offensive lines, so we don't know much from anything just yet.
I just said dude under my breath after I looked at this 49ers schedule for the next, 6 games. We know the Steelers this week. Then the Browns, who haven't been playing great football, and that one's at home. Then on the road, the Rams. That's a difficult one. But then you have the Redskins. Then you have the Panthers, maybe without Cam Newton still at that point. And then you have the Cardinals. I mean, at worst, this might be a 6-2 team.
And again, this is why we talk about this in the preseason, though, because these things matter. This is why we target Matt Breida earlier than the rest of the industry, and so on and so on.
I do want to point you, before we get to this final 3rd game that you and I are previewing, since we're talking about Kyle Shanahan, to Chris Sims' podcast. Chris Sims unbuttoned his Wednesday episode with the coolest man at NBC Sports, Paul Burmeister. He did a deep dive on every single week 2 performance. He told us a great story of Kyle Shanahan before we started recording.
Well, he butted in first and tried to interrupt the podcast because he thought we were recording.
Look, he owns the place.
We tricked him.
He owns the place. But Kyle Shanahan apparently invented that play that Marquise Goodwin scored on, where he's blocking the front side, works through the formation, and finds wide open in the backside against zone. Anyways, go and check out that play if you have not. I also want to point you in the direction of Mike Florio's podcast, PFTPM, since he had an interview with Juju Smith-Schuster, who we just discussed as well. All right, let's close it out with our segment, our individual segment, with the New Orleans Saints at the Seattle Seahawks. 44.5 total. Seahawks are favored by 4.5 at home. They are 2-0, and the Saints are 1-1. Again, another team that is going into this game with a different option, a backup option, but in this case for the Saints, it might be a backups option.
So let me flip this to you because I have gone back and watched. I've been trying to figure it out. I've been racking my brain all week over it. What do you consider Alvin Kamara to be in this offense? Because last week in the second half, Latavius Murray, I figured they would just throw him in and then we run the offense through the tackles and the guards on the ground, but he only got 1 touch in the second half with Teddy Bridgewater under center. Now, it was throwing a backup in there, so perhaps they changed the game plan this week, which is what I assume.
Yeah.
But I genuinely don't know. Like, what is Kamara? Because I went hyperbole earlier in the week. I think a flex option was a tad hyperbole. Running back two is feasible.
Yeah, no, I mean, running back 2 is probably where you want to put your mind, and then if he outperforms that, then, that's a plus. Look, in week 1, which was a complete shootout against the Houston Texans, 30-28, the team won, he had 20 touches. And that's kind of what we would expect, especially with the Latavius Murray touchdown that he scored.
That's at home.
And that's at home.
Yes.
On the road against the Rams, which we expected to be another high-scoring affair, and then we know that Drew Brees went down halfway through the game, he only had 14 touches. At the very least, unless a week of practice does well for Teddy Bridgewater, a week of practice as a starter does well for Taysom Hill, or a combination of the two, I think where it's going to hurt most is Alvin Kamara, the receiving back, out in space, unless he can create some packages and get players out front, because I think we downplay how good the Saints offensive line is, and the Saints offensive line is absolutely fantastic. I think any quarterback can possibly succeed in that situation, not to level Drew Brees and his efficiency, but just because of the situation that the offensive line sets up. But again, and I talked about this with Ian on the previous podcast, this is just going to, I think, light a fire in Sean Payton a little bit. It's going to let him flex his creative muscle a little bit, and he's going to be pumped to use the combination of Taysom Hill, who's talked up for 3 years, and Teddy Bridgewater as well.
That's why I had Teddy Bridgewater lowest among the newcomers on the waiver wire ranking this past week, because we know Taysom Hill's getting involved. Like, this is Teddy Bridgewater at 80-85% of the snaps.
But at the very least, I actually think this narrows the Saints' passing attack and volume production-wise even more. Because I don't think we're going to see Traquan Smith as much. I don't know if we'll see as much Ted Ginn.
Who's injured right now.
I think we'll see more Jared Cook. I think we'll see more Michael Thomas.
It's still a lot of Michael Thomas.
And it's a lot of Michael Thomas. Especially with his A-dot, it's going to be Michael Thomas.
Yes.
But I even think we see more Alvin Kamara. Like, I wouldn't be surprised if we see less and less Latavius Murray.
Okay, that's fair.
All right, we're halfway through the Sizzling Six. We'll be right back with Hayden Winks. Now it's time to bring on the youthful Hayden Winks. He writes the Fantasy Forecast, which is up on Rotoworld later in the week. I think it's now based on when the podcast posts. Fantasy Forecast is an unbelievable column.
Yes.
He does an awesome job with it. And we're so pleased to have Hayden take a few minutes to talk with us. He also chooses the 3 games we're going to talk about. And the first one is the Carolina Panthers at the Arizona Cardinals. Cardinals have switched over to, I believe, 2.5-point favorites here at home, a 47.5 total. No one has won a game in this matchup. Let's put it that way, Hayden. But there's a lot of fantasy upside with Kyler Murray and his receivers in this game.
Yeah, so the Cardinals and Cliff Kingsbury, they're off to the races already. They're 5th in neutral situation pass rate. They have the 2nd fastest neutral situation pace of play. Murray's leading in pass attempts right now. He's 4th in passing yards. I have him as a top 6 quarterback play this week, just because they might have some good field position with Cam Newton out on the other side of the ball. They're playing really fast, and Larry Fitzgerald and Christian Kirk are playing well too.
The most amazing part of Larry Fitzgerald's resurgence or involvement in this offense is that he's second on the team right now in targets, or he's second in the league in targets 20-plus yards downfield, and it's not an accident. They're actually scheming him, as you've seen. They actually scheme him on deep shots. There's a reason why he ranks so highly.
Well, I mean, I think across the league, using slot receivers on vertical routes has been underused. Hayden, I'm fascinated by how the Panthers are going to line up against these wide receivers. One, because the Panthers don't have 4 corners that are good on their team. They might not have 3 corners that are good on their team. And their 2 best corners are outside corners, in Dante Jackson and James Bradbury. We know that the 2 best receivers for the Cardinals play in the slot, and Larry Fitzgerald and Christian Kirk. I assume that Dante Jackson will get run in the slot, maybe against Fitzgerald or Kirk. But Hayden, this is also a team in the past that thought it was a great idea to line Shaq Thompson opposite Larry Fitzgerald and ask him to play a veteran receiver one-on-one.
Yeah, so a lot of those reasons are why I have Fitzgerald and Christian Kirk as top 20 receivers this week. They're just getting so much usage right now. Like you mentioned, Fitzgerald's 6th in air yards, 2nd in red zone targets. He's not just an underneath check down receiver anymore. And they're just playing so fast where pretty much regardless how they're going to use him, whether it's downfield or underneath, he's going to be putting up numbers. I think everyone's kind of scared to call him a wide receiver 1-2 right now, just because he's 36 years old or however old he is. But he's definitely trending in that direction.
Unless we forget about Damiere Byrd, who is top 12 in routes run in the league right now, only because he is firmly, unquestionably the number 3 wide receiver on that team. Quietly, but still the number 3 wide receiver on that team.
And I believe he's top 6 in routes across the NFL. But speaking of Damiere Byrd, it's a low-key revenge game for him. Anything on the Panthers you have for this, Hayden? I mean, Ian was on this podcast yesterday talking about how while Kyle Allen isn't a big name, it might not be that big of a drop-off compared to how Cam Newton has played this year. So still fire up DJ Moore, still fire up Curtis Samuel.
Yeah, DJ Moore's third in targets. I don't see that changing too drastically with Kyle Allen at quarterback. And Curtis Samuel, 8th in air yards. He's just missed a couple of these big plays. Cam Newton's accuracy obviously had fallen off because of his foot injury. So I agree with Ian. I don't see too much of a drop-off with the way Cam Newton had been playing recently.
And remember, Kyle Allen's start last year, 5 carries. You get that rushing floor as well.
We'll move to the next topic after I say this. There are some dark clouds over the Carolina Panthers pretty soon, I think. Unless they make the playoffs, and they most likely won't with how Cam Newton has struggled so far this season and might not even play, I think major change is coming. Head coach, general manager, maybe even quarterback next season.
Does that mean you're selling DJ Moore and or Curtis Samuel?
No, because I still think that Kyle Allen among backups across the NFL is more confident in his ability than maybe anyone else and will throw downfield. I just mean that from a franchise structure, how Ron Rivera is widely respected, but I wouldn't be surprised if he's not the head coach in the NFL and of the Panthers next season.
And then one more quick thing. Greg Olsen, top 5, top 6 tight end this week.
You
Cardinals,
think so?
100 yards to TJ Hawkinson in week 1. Cardinals, 100 yards to Mark Andrews in week 2. And now we have Greg Olsen, who has 18 targets so far through 2 weeks.
I mean, that's a lot of volume for 4 names that we apparently like on the Panthers. All right, Hayden, the other game you have is the Lions at the Eagles. Eagles are 6.5-point favorites at home, a 46 total in this one. The Eagles are 1-1. The Lions are 1-0-1. My question to you, Hayden, is this: who was Carson Wentz going to throw the football to other than Zach Ertz?
Well, it's definitely going to start with Ertz. 16 targets last week. Probably has the most target equity among tight ends this week. Obviously, top 3 option. But it's going to be Nelson Aguilar, 11 targets, 131 air yards last week. And then the 2 guys that are a little off the radar, J.J. Arcega-Whiteside, who was a really, really strong prospect. I think Josh, you agree with that?
Mm-hmm.
And then Mac Hollins will be filling in the Deshaun Jackson role. So obviously it's a downgrade for Wentz. I still have him as a top 10 or 12 quarterback this week. But it's Nelson Aguilar and DFS with some J.J. Arcega-Whiteside and some tournament lineups.
2 of those games for Aguilar last season, sans Alshon Jeffrey, occurred with Nick Foles under center, but I will say his target share increased from 14 to 21% in those 3 games that Jeffrey didn't play. And all season long, while we stressed fading Zach Ertz, given his 4 of 8 targets inside the 10 that he turned into touchdowns and like incredulously high 27 targets inside the 20, we did not think that Dallas Goedert and all these receiver injuries were the out for Zach Ertz to just come back in and be an every down tight end.
Right. Hayden, big question to you, because a lot of people drafted Miles Sanders on the fringe of fantasy starter area. It's almost getting to that point where they are extremely frustrated, extremely worried that he might not pan out. What's your view of Miles Sanders this week?
Yeah, so he just looks really inexperienced, which isn't too surprising since how little he played at Penn State. I don't think he's finding running lanes as well as we would have thought. He's kind of relying on his athleticism and just kind of hasn't panned out. I think this could be a spot where they get him out as a pass catcher a little bit more just because they're missing all these targets. But yeah, it's the hype has kind of fallen off with Miles Sanders. He is a potential buy low, but I think he's just a flex option at best right now.
Let's close out this matchup with someone on the Lions side quickly, because we know that C.J. Anderson was cut this week again, and C.J. Anderson was actually vulturing some touches and opportunity from Kerryon Johnson. Hayden, do you think this might be like we could get a week ahead on the Kerryon Johnson blowout spot, the Kerryon Johnson hype, and maybe use him in some DFS lineups possibly because he might see more touches than we've seen in previous weeks?
Yeah, I definitely think his usage is going to go up. I do want to pay attention to Ty Johnson a little bit. I'm kind of concerned that he's going to steal a little more work than we're kind of expecting. I just think the Lions have had opportunities to give Kerryon the full role, and they have chosen not to do that a couple times already. So I'm a little concerned, but I think he has to be like a top 15 option this week.
All right, let's close out the sizzling 6 with the New York Giants at the Tampa Bay Bucks. Again, Hayden, You choose some interesting games. Okay, we know the Giants, the big story is Daniel Jones going to be the starter for his Giants in his first game. The Bucs, however, are 6.5-point favorites off that Thursday night win. They're 1-1, again, coming on top against the Carolina Panthers. Mike Evans is kind of in the same boat as Miles Sanders in some ways. However, Mike Evans was drafted much, much earlier in fantasy drafts. Just 13 targets, 6 receptions, and 89 yards through 2 games so far, Hayden.
Yeah, I think Mike Evans might be the buy low of the century. He has 40% of the team's air yards. He's, I think, my wide receiver 6 or 7 on the week. He's going up against Norris Jenkins this week. He has 7 inches, 38 pounds on him. Yeah, Mike Evans is getting those downfield targets that we want. Just kind of hasn't been connecting on them too much. We know those are a little volatile, so as long as the usage stays there, the points will be coming.
And we know the Giants have allowed over 10 yards an attempt through 2 games. This is also why I have been texting, I forget the 2019 equivalent, texting around my league.
Snapchatting
around my league, trying to trade for Mike Evans because the boom is happening this week.
I didn't get that IG story. What about O.J. Howard, Hayden? Because O.J. Howard was another one that was drafted as the tight end 4 in many places, tight end 5, tight end 6, and he's done absolutely nothing, and it doesn't look like there's really like a light at the end of the tunnel here for O.J. Howard and his usage and his production coming up.
Yeah, he ran around on 60% of dropbacks last week. There were concerns about Bruce Arians and his tight ends and his history with them, and I didn't really buy that at first just because O.J. Howard is, I think, truly a special talent at the position. But I think if he doesn't do anything this week against the Giants, who've just kind of been a tight end funnel recently, then it's really time to panic. I still have O.J. Howard as a top 10 option just because the tight end slate is really bad. But, it's you definitely have to be panicking a little bit.
He just has to make sure he has Clemson coming up in his schedule, right, Hayden? That's a college football joke.
Yeah, exactly.
No, because, I mean, his usage at Alabama was very similar to what he's seen so far in the NFL, and that's just extremely frustrating probably for him and for us as well. Thanks, Hayden. Again, you can check out Hayden's Fantasy Forecast column up on Rotoworld right now. It's fantastic, a very useful resource that goes all the way up until kickoff on Sunday. Time to welcome Patrick Doherty, RotoPat, who writes the rankings up on that front page of Rotoworld. It's so beautiful. Be sure to check those for any of your lineup conundrums, your start-sit questions. Pat, let's start off with Josh Allen, the quarterback of the Buffalo Bills against the Cincinnati Bengals this week. You have him as quarterback 10. He was 19 of 30 for 253 and a touchdown last week, and he already has 2 touchdowns on the ground so far this season.
Yeah, I can't decide. Like QB 10 in like a way, like to me, like kind of seemed high for Josh Allen, but I think a lot of people might think it's like overly conservative because he's flashed a little bit of everything through his first 2 games. That includes turnovers, 4 of which he had in week 1. But like you said, he has a rushing touchdown in each of his first 2 games out. He's been kind of operating as his own goal line back occasionally. I marveled at this on our Monday podcast. He literally ran a quarterback sweep last week, which you just don't really ever see at the NFL level. He did it with Frank Gore as his lead blocker. And he's quickly establishing connections with each of his 2 new receivers, and John Brown and Cole Beasley. It looks like they've been playing together 2 to 3 years. And then you have all that, and then you have a matchup this week. Through 2 games, the Bengals are allowing 11 yards per pass attempt, which kind of makes your eyes light up with a big play quarterback like Josh Allen. So QB 10, I'm still going to be like very conservative with Josh Allen for a while. I'm always kind of a conservative ranker, and players like Josh Allen scare me, but there is actually an argument to be made that this ranking is too conservative.
I like to add all the puzzle pieces into place as the week continues. And I will say Buffalo's implied total as of Thursday morning increased to 25 points. And I speak to quite a few professional handicappers and bettors early in the week.
That's a humble brag.
And I know that Buffalo -6 as of overnight Sunday and Monday morning was a fire bet. So.
I speak to a few butchers at grocery stores every few weeks.
I speak to them too.
Pat, here's my prediction for this game, okay? And it's a little nuanced, but I wouldn't be surprised if the Buffalo Bills run a high percentage of 12 personnel with Tyler Kroft in a revenge game coming back in this one, and try to keep the Cincinnati Bengals in 3 linebacker sets because they have some of the slowest linebackers, least athletic linebackers across the NFL, and allow Josh Allen to have his season high in rushing yards. I think that's absolutely achievable for him. And Pat, for quarterback 10, you're basically telling the people that lost Ben Roethlisberger, lost Drew Brees, lost Cam Newton to go out and get Josh Allen as that pickup this week.
Yeah, fire him up. And as you were saying, with regards to kind of his own short yardage or goal line back, Devin Singletary is going to be out. He hasn't necessarily been operating in that role, but Devin Singletary's status is very tenuous for Sunday. So Josh Allen's rushing threat could be even more needed than it has been through the first 2 weeks. And as for people I've been talking to this week, I've been looking to get my yard aerated and reseeded. Yeah, you need to have a beautiful lawn in this part of the country.
Pat, talking about old man things, any interest in Frank Gore because of Devin Singletary being out?
Yeah, absolutely. Even with Devin Singletary healthy, Singletary got hurt very late in the game last week, so it didn't really impact their touch totals. Frank Gore was pushing 20 touches, and without Devin Singletary there, he's a clear flex. You can make an easy argument for an RB2. We tend to keep Frank Gore out of the RB2 ranks just because there's so little upside, but a very safe floor-based flex option for week 3.
Let's go to another running back that doesn't give us a lot of energy when we see his name. That's Carlos Hyde, who was at the LA Chargers. Pat, 20 carries for 90 yards last week against the Jacksonville Jaguars. He's seen 0 passing game usage, but he seems to have that early down work for the Houston Texans, and you have him as running back 26 this week.
Listen, it's never going to be the world you want to live in. You just have to take the world that we do live in, and that world is Carlos Hyde, RB2-3. That world is Carlos Hyde starting over Duke Johnson. Bill O'Brien has pretty clearly reached the same conclusion that every other NFL quarterback who's ever coached Duke Johnson has reached for some reason, and that's that he's a third down back. Johnson did outsnap Hyde in week 1, but Hyde flipped that on its head last week, outsnapped him 39-25. We know he outcarried him 20-6. And, Carlos Hyde's been kind of doing his thing, racking up tons of yards after first contact. And now I think he has a safe workload against a team, the Chargers, that teams have kind of been running against with impunity so far, over 60 attempts through 2 games against the Chargers, nearing almost 5 yards per carry. And it just looks like a good spot for a running back with what's looking like a good role. And as you know, in fantasy, you don't have to love the player. It's about the role and it's about the workload. And it certainly appears, unfortunately, that Carlos Hyde is both.
It is unfortunately the role he's been given, but I also have a question as it pertains to Duke Johnson's role, because if the Chargers are able to keep up in this one, and the Texans rank 7th against the running back in the passing game, and as we know, the absence of Hunter Henry means the Chargers have to go through Austin Eckler both in the passing game and the running game. So if they keep up, then do you think it becomes a Duke Johnson game? Like, where do you have Duke Johnson rank in comparison to Carlos Hyde?
I can't remember the exact, but it's only 7 to 8 spots lower. He's kind of in the low 30s. But the problem is, one of the Deshaun Watson memes that was talked about late in the summer, I believe by Evan Silva, and it's kind of rung true so far the first 2 games, is Deshaun Watson doesn't really check down to running backs. And Duke Johnson's receiving, it hasn't been like totally dystopian or anything yet. We're talking about this dystopian Carlos Hyde world, but we haven't really seen like a Duke Johnson game yet in Houston. So maybe it's just like, let's make Deshaun Watson basically and Duke Johnson prove that they might eventually have that kind of connection in these kind of games. But I'm ranking him basically as if I'm kind of expecting that. So I still think Duke Johnson will be at least 8 to 10 touches. And when you get an explosive player with 8 to 10 touches, that puts them on the flex radar.
Next up is Mike Evans, who went for 8-4-61 last week against the Carolina Panthers. He faces the New York Giants at home. Pat, we talked about this with, I believe, Hayden earlier on as well. Pat, since you have him as wide receiver 8, and he certainly is not providing production like the top 10 wide receiver, I believe Rotoworld might go under if Mike Evans does not reach value this week.
It would be bad. It would be bad for a lot of people for a lot of different reasons. He's still 17th in air yards, even with kind of like this dysfunctional offense through 2 games, and an offense that finally kind of looked like it was getting in gear in the second half last week against the Panthers. And he's been drawing a lot of deep balls, as would be implied by being 17th in air yards. He was fingertips away from a much bigger game in week 2. If he scored that, 30 to 40 yard touchdown, the Mike Evans narrative would be a lot different this week. And as Rotoworld's Ian Hartitz points out, he has a massive size advantage over Janoris Jenkins, who we should be seeing a ton of this week. And the Giants got absolutely roasted by the Cowboys deep game in week 1. So like on the surface, the stats, as we know, do not look great. But if you dig, even just an inch beneath the surface, most of the indicators remain very good for wide receiver 1, Mike Evans.
We have discussed air yards on this podcast quite a bit. So quickly, let me just say, remember,
Smart.
We chase intent, and air yards allows for intent because it means the receiver's being used downfield. And it's been proven that it actually has a good correlation, downfield targets, with fantasy production. That's why we don't worry about results. If a receiver's struggling in the box score, if he's getting air yards, it actually hints us to continue playing him because he will have fantasy production eventually.
It basically shows the fantasy production left on the field that was not, on the stat sheet at the end of the day.
Not everyone knows that, so I just wanted to quickly get it out there.
Okay.
John, I love what you say about not worrying about results. All my 0-2 fantasy teams, we're just not worried about it. We're just sticking
Keep
with the
playing
process.
Miles Sanders and Mike Evans. Don't worry about it.
Yeah.
Just sticking with the process.
Pat, let's close out with John Ross, who has been super surprising so far this season. Last week, 8 targets, 4 catches, 112 yards, and a touchdown. He has 2 games over 100 yards, a touchdown, at least one in each game. This week, he has the Buffalo Bills, and you have him, Pat, in your rankings as wide receiver 22.
This is one of those ones I dated as soon as I sent it to you. I have since in my final Thursday morning.
Pat, let's talk about this.
Session.
Let's talk about this.
Let's air out the grievances
because,
for everybody.
Pat, we prep for the show. We gotta make graphics for the show, and we are patient with these rankings, and so we get them from you in the morning. So Pat, there must be some what goes on from you from between 10 p.m. when you give these a look till 10 a.m. when you give them a final look. Is it just something you have to sleep over? Did John Ross do something in your nightmares last night that made you knock him down and move him up?
Yeah, I send these to you late in the PM, maybe in the AM on the East Coast. And then as the thoughts reorganize in my head overnight, sometimes this inspiration strikes in the morning. I realize, so John Ross, listen, he leads the NFL in receiving by 22 yards. He's tied for 8th in targets, which suggests, it's not just, it has been some big plays, but it's not just all been fluke big plays. He is seeing legitimate volume. Back-to-back 100-yard games. How can you not like that? But, it's John Ross. And it's a team, against the Buffalo Bills, it's pretty much a no-fly zone so far this year and last year. So I kind of wanted to make, as much as I wanted to make a John Ross statement rank, which is still I have no idea what the consensus is from John Ross, so I get the feeling he's still not in the top 30 a lot of places, and I only dropped in 4 or 5 spots. It's wide receiver 27. So in some ways it's still sort of a statement rank, but I came to my senses a little bit where this is John Ross, this is the Buffalo Bills defense. It's been undeniable what we've seen through 2 games so far. But this would make a lot of sense as a speed bump spot. But you can't deny the usage, and we know the big playability. So even in a speed bump spot, someone with his skill set and his 2-season production so far, I feel like you have to have him in the top 30.
And so all of that is your reason to aggravate the grand people of NBC by moving him down 1 spot overnight.
Pat,
honestly, it's I sit there and I look, and then all of a sudden I say, whoa, I don't know, man. That's really kind of what it is.
Pat, the best of the best work here at NBC, because we're recording this, at 12:29 on Thursday, midday, and they've already updated the graphic. Pat, you're all set. We don't have to do anything. I just love that you want some drama in your hit. You want to add some pizzazz to your hit. It can't be bland.
Roto Diva.
It can't be boring. You just have to change it up a little bit. We love that here, Pat. We need a little bit of that energy in our podcast each week.
Yeah, it could be the weekly tension. Which ranking would Pat change for absolutely no reason in the past 10 hours? So, yeah.
You could say a lot of things about Pat's rankings, but they do not stay the same. We know that much.
And you know what? That leads into my pitch of they're not going to just stay where they are now. By Sunday at noon.
By 12:31 on Thursday.
They will be changed as well. By the way, noon Eastern each and every Sunday, we are streaming Rotoworld Live. That's on NBC Sports' YouTube page and twitch.tv/Rotoworld. So go and check that out for all of your lineup conundrums and questions. Pat, thanks so much. Go back and check out those rankings. They're posted on Rotoworld right now. John Daigle, thanks so much. Go and check out Hayden Winks' Fantasy Forecast column as well. And we'll be back again, Rotoworld Live, Sunday, noon Eastern, and tell one friend, and back with the roundup episode for your morning commute. Talk to y'all then. See ya.